Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the IBAC is-BAO SafetyNet webinar series presented today with Josh Olds and Alice Griffith of USI, Unmanned Safety Institute, talking about RPAS development, meeting sector needs with safety in focus, solutions for the UAS workforce. I'm Catherine Hilst. I am the IS-BAO Operations Manager and the voice in the background today. I do have a few housekeeping items for you. The audience members will be on mute and will stay on mute during the presentation, but there is a place in your control panel to ask questions or put in comments. It's on the bottom of the panel, and you'll see it says questions. Feel free to type in your questions and comments at any time, and we will look at those at the end of the presentation. So really excited to host this session about essential insights into the world of RPAS with our expert-led panel. We'll cover the latest technology advancements, sector-specific applications, and the paramount importance of safety standards in the industry. Looking at insights into regulatory frameworks and connecting with professionals from various fields as we discuss the integration of RPAS into the aviation landscape. Josh Olds is the president, CEO, and co-founder of USI with a diverse background in commercial and civil remotely piloted aircraft roles. He leads USI, a key partner to industry risk mitigation and management for remotely piloted operations and associated waivers or exemptions. Josh holds a master's degree in aeronautics from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and is a commercial multi-engine instrument-rated pilot and certified for airframe and power plant mechanic. Alice Griffith is the Director of Enterprise Partnerships for Unmanned Safety Institute, where she's responsible for developing sales and managing partnership strategies for all USI's commercial and civil sectors. Alice previously worked with Airspace Link for 3 years, helping to bring their software and data products to market and to form industry partnerships for advanced and safe integration of drones into state and local governments across the US. Alice started her career in the drone industry in 2017 as a business unit director with SB Global, working to commercialize Air Force IP and assist healthcare organizations with autonomous vehicle integration. Prior to that, she spent 12 years working in transportation, distribution, and logistics for food and healthcare manufacturers. She's a licensed FAA drone pilot and has earned several top 40 under 40 awards and was recognized last year by the Women in Drones Trade Association as a 2023 Women to Watch Award recipient. Josh, Alice, thank you so much for being here, and I will hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you for inviting us onto the session. This is one of my favorite audiences to talk to because it's aviation and it's international aviation, and emerging technology and how it fits into that space is a favorite topic of ours. So a little bit about USI. We're an aviation company. We've been in the aviation industry actually celebrating 10 years this year. So 10 years of emerging technology, again, across the globe. Drones have taken different shape and sizes and operations, and so for USI, we really focus on how you standardize emerging technology into aviation. Using aviation safety practices, but how do you promote that standard into your operation? We focus on 3 pillars: technology, personnel, and organizations. To date, we've got workforce programs globally. We have workforce programs in Norway and with partners in Thailand. In the US, we're in almost all 50 states now with educational workforce programs. We work with colleges, secondary institutions, and then corporately, we support corporate flight departments, both traditional aviation and emerging drone technology operations that are deploying hundreds of pilots and aircraft internally and establishing aviation-grade foundations so that they can scale efficiently, safely, and effectively with their operations and find that return on investment within those flight departments. So to kind of kick it off, I thought it'd be a good place to start in the data section, just talking about what does this industry look like today? Where's it coming from? And a lot of this data is coming straight from the FAA forecast reports that they publish every 2 years. Right now, the industry, spend, they're talking about $16 billion. And if you look at the investments that have gone into everything from the drone technology, again, what we're talking about, small aircraft, all the way up into advanced air mobility, has been massive amounts of money going into the space. And the reason being is that it deploys across all industry clusters. What was once transportation and logistics, it was a single kind of segment for aviation. We now see aviation really infiltrating every career cluster that you see, from agriculture to public safety to telecom to infrastructure, and so on and so forth, real estate. And so when you look at this industry and just the growth segment of the industry, it's exciting. We were talking before we came into the call. It grows every year. You see new applications, new use cases of this technology. And so the interesting part about this career is that the workforce skill sets that are needed to deploy all of this technology, they're still a ways behind the curve. We're bringing a lot of new aviation assets through drone technology or remotely piloted technology into the industry. And we have a lot of aviators, and we have a lot of technologists and recreational pilots. But when it comes to operating this technology as an aviator, with an aviation mentality, that's something that we're still working on. We're still building that footprint and defining that footprint and the need for that. Moving into kind of the remote pilot forecast. So this data is specific to the US, but when you look at the remote pilot data in the United States, and then you kind of look at the forecast for that, by 2027, 3 years from now, the expectation is 402,000 remote pilots. Comparatively, if you look at that from like an aviation, traditional aviation, it far surpasses the number of traditional aviation pilots. So when put into comparison, if you can move to the next slide, we're kind of talking about remote pilots operating lots of equipment, and again, one pilot could be operating, 5, 10 different aircraft as this industry scales into automation. So a really interesting thing to look at is the exponential growth in large UAS. So these are exemptions granted for large UAS in the national airspace system. Large technology, being over 55 pounds, is presenting really unique opportunities in the world of agriculture specifically. But when you look at big, heavy aircraft, these are aircraft that are pulling banners down the beach. These are aircraft under Part 137, maybe flying pesticide agriculture for precision agriculture. And so the large UAS is just an indicator of where this industry is going with, again, currently, and again, this is all forecasted data as of 2022. Projecting large UAS and public aircraft registry, it's another indicator. Again, public aircraft registry can register as public aircraft, but if you look at the exponential curve in growth, this is another indicator of kind of how are we seeing the value of emerging technology. If you circle back, I kind of think back to 2014 when we started the company, we were really looking at this from an aviation lens. But I just remember conversations with aviators at the time, and it was like drone technology, like, yeah, that's cute. It was all small technology. You go to Best Buy and buy it at your local stores. But the reality is this technology's existed for a very long time. And so when you see curves like this from an emerging technology perspective and how they're being deployed to create, safety initiatives, efficiency initiatives, this is an indicator of where this industry is going to be, in the next 6 years as we approach 2030. And then a couple of other data points, on these next slides is, you got your FAA Part 107. In a lot of ways, the FAA Part 107, I usually explain it was a big wet blanket thrown over the industry. The technology existed. You could do a lot with drone technology, but when you look at kind of an FAA requirement for Part 107, it was a knowledge test. You had to go take it at an FAA testing center, and it basically gave you some knowledge on regulations, weather, airspace. But when you look at it from an industry perspective, and again, especially from a professional aviation perspective, your employers, they really need hands-on training. They need to understand, how to fly the technology that you're operating commercially. And so you kind of go through this line by line, and you're looking at, there's a lot of competencies, both knowledge-based and skill-based, that are akin to aviation. So, there's a lot of similarities to aviation, but it's so different in how a lot of these knowledge areas are applied inside of the remotely piloted space. So things like shared fate, we talk about hazardous attitudes, and the shared fate with the aircraft. If you're flying an aircraft, you have a shared fate with that aircraft. In the remotely piloted world, it's hard to teach someone, educate somebody that, look, that aircraft is your responsibility. Yes, it's flying, away from you, but there's people, there's property, there's aircraft flying in the national airspace. Like, it's your responsibility. You have a shared fate, or you should have a shared fate with that technology, because it poses a hazard to the national airspace system. And so hazardous attitudes is something that's evolved and shifted over time. We also look at, it's a segmented aircraft. So you have an aircraft, you have a ground control station, you have a data link, which is your command. It's how you communicate and get information back and forth from your computer and your aircraft. And then you have a payload, and that payload could be cargo. You could be package delivering, or it could be a sensor where you're capturing data in the near infrared spectrum, or the red, green, blue spectrum, or on a completely different spectrum. But that data is what's really driving this technology forward, as we're learning how to leverage that information in unique ways inside of these corporations. So the skill sets and the industry requirements are continue to expand. Even while we have Part 107 is kind of that first rung on the ladder, you got to get it to fly. It's a commercial requirement. Last couple of data points here. Again, in the US, just interesting data charts are registrations of Part 107 by regional area. So you can kind of see in the United States where the hot spots of remotely piloted technology are, and where these registrations are occurring. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more to the registrations themselves. If you look at traditional aviation, and then you look at remotely piloted technology, this was Q4 2022. So this was 2 years ago. You had 726,000 registered. So this is non-model. So this is registered aircraft as commercial use aircraft in the national airspace. It's a large number, and it's only getting bigger as new aircraft entrants are coming into the space, and we're adding more registered aircraft. And so I think this concept where, that blue airspace, term that we talk about a lot, like it's blue ocean kind of concept, where it's going to be really hard it becomes less and less blue ocean the more aircraft we add into the airspace. And so safety and cognizance of right-of-ways and who's operating the national airspace and how are we operating becomes such an important topic.
Hey, Josh, I want to add a little point here, because I think that as we look to where the registrations are today, I don't think they've surpassed 1 million yet, but I think they're closer to 1 million and trending in that direction. So obviously, like, lots of good data here. But in comparison, I was having a conversation with some folks out of FAA ATC the other day, and they monitor about 42,000 in the manned aviation world. So it's a gigantic difference in the number of aircraft that's coming into our world. And I think that's really interesting.
And the airspace, population where these are operating under, you're taking a lot more aircraft, and a lot of these aircraft are operating, under Part 107 is 400 feet AGL and under. So you're taking a lot more aircraft and you're congesting them into a smaller section of airspace. And so it just creates a lot of unique issues, technological, operationally, that we haven't had to contend with in the aviation world yet. And so it's creating new issues to solve.
100% agreed. And that's a good segue for the regulatory framework for emerging tech. So we have a lot of existing aviations rule sets that are here and that are existing that I think a lot of people are familiar with. And then Part 108, which is a new and coming regulation and rule set that a lot of people are very interested in. So as far as going through a little bit of a background on that, what we want to make sure is very clear and understood to those that maybe do know the industry or want just a refresher on this is Part 107. It is at the individual level, intended for the recreational, commercial pilots, but also for anybody doing recreational flights too. There's the Before You Fly and different apps that exist and kind of came out with that several years ago, but for line of sight operations is Part 107. And hundreds of approved waivers within this category. Probably the majority of the operations today are under 107, but a lot of them do also have a waiver for 107. So you've got, examples like neighborhood delivery with Walmart, Walgreens, Amazon, a lot of the retailers that have big names and have had some nice press releases for the operations that are happening with their locations. Also health and campus delivery. Everybody, I think, is interested in seeing where the medical space will grow. But in particular, mostly drone-in-the-box solutions have had a lot of success with waivers, and then also with location-specific survey, real estate, photogrammetry, bridge inspections, some infrastructure inspections as well, but a lot of those are getting beyond visual line of sight operations at this point in time. And that's where 108 will come in. So we have Part 108 that will cater to beyond visual line of sight operations. It's something that's been needed in our industry for a really long time. A lot of people are excited for it. We do feel that the FAA is making a big push to have this by fall of next year. We'll see some review of it this year, and hopefully we'll be moving into more activation in 2025. But this will replace what has been currently looked at as waivered operations, or at least provide a subset to it. And there's a lot of kind of ways this is being thought about. It will probably be done with some permits in place underneath Part 108. So you'll essentially have various, maybe 4 different levels of permitting that will come under Part 108. So a lot of activity is happening here with the Dallas Key site, and then the waivered infrastructure inspections that we mentioned for rail, power, tower, and then some rural healthcare delivery operations that have received BV loss waivers. Josh, anything to add for Part 108 before we move into the other 2?
No, I think the only comment I'd make here is, 108's been a long time coming. I mentioned at the beginning of the call, USI is 10 years old this year. Beyond visual line of sight is as old as the Department of Defense has been flying beyond visual line of sight. So it's not a new concept in terms of the technology. It's been around a long time. We've been waiting for beyond visual line of sight since 2016 when Part 107 came out. I think a lot of industry folks were actually surprised that there wasn't more leeway for beyond visual line of sight way back when. Now you can fly beyond visual line of sight today with waiver, and again, you can obtain waivers, and there's ways to get those. But Part 108 creates a compliance-based way of flying BV loss, and that's going to allow a lot of companies to start scaling how they use emerging technology within their corporations, where traditionally they've been flying, small aircraft, visual line of sight, which again, for all intents and purposes, that wasn't how technology was created. It was created to fly remotely. So this is a really exciting time for the industry.
Yeah, agreed. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions on Part 108 when we get towards the end. We'll take questions at the end. But moving into Part 135 and 137, these are existing rule sets that really are highly advanced operations where UAS is starting to expand even more. So we've got Part 135, which a lot of people are familiar with, but air carrier certification, so the ability to carry cargo packages or goods, particular for hire, for pay, for service. This does include like hazmat, medical items, and things of that nature. There's 5 certificate holders in the United States that exist for UAS. And then Part 137, we have agricultural operations that mostly happen here. So this is certification to dispense or spray substances. And the reason we're bundling these 2 together is because the payload is very specific and very complex on these operations. So something is actually being dropped or sprayed or precision landing to its utmost degree, and then also precision spray or something that's happening in the agricultural space. So a lot of specific requirements that have to exist in this space and a lot of extra risk. But there are 37 certificate holders for drones. So I had to do this research earlier in under 137. So I think that that's actually impressive and a lot of opportunity and growth that I think we'll continue to see in that space. And we'll get into 146 in a minute, but Josh, anything else to add on 135 or 137?
Did we touch on Part 91?
We haven't, I'm sorry, please do.
So I would just highlight, because again, all of this is kind of covering the fact that, look, drone operations, Part 107 is the primary today, but you're seeing a lot of operations under existing FAR parts. And I think that's what a lot of the aviation industry, I don't know if they're not realizing yet, or if it's just really quietly happening, but you have, to Alice's point, all these 135 operations for package delivery, but Part 91 waivered operations. There's a couple of companies in the US that are actually operating under Part 91. Phoenix Air, Unmanned, based out of Cartersville, Georgia. They're flying their Swiss drone, which is a 200-pound jet fuel helicopter, under a Part 91 waiver. And then you have a banner towing company. Actually, we recently partnered with them for workforce development out of Miami, and they're Sustainable Skylines, and that's a banner towing drone company. So big drones, 200-pound drones that are pulling banners or carrying heavy payloads, LiDAR and assets for electric infrastructure. two very different use cases, but operating under 91 waiver. What that means is they have Part 61 pilots. So you have a private pilot with a UAS education and training that's operating this technology in higher risk environments. So it's they're mitigating the risk under Part 91 waiver. But what I find interesting, again, just being an aviation geek, is this is really changing the face of, or evolving the face of how a lot of aviation type operations are being managed or operated with emerging technology.
Yeah, great info there. A lot of really exciting use cases to look up, or companies to look up, probably. So something that you may not have heard of, or maybe you have heard of it, is what will come as an expansion to Part 146. So this is where the UTM certification is intended to live, another potential rule set expansion that's coming in 2025. So for the work that's being done currently under the NTAP process in the Dallas Key Site area in Dallas, Texas, that's being led by NASA with Wing and Zipline, there is qualifications for safety case needs and criteria that will need to be met under this rule set for companies to be qualified, certified as a UTM or USS, so unmanned traffic management system, or an UAS service supplier, which is part of the NASA framework, an architecture that was published and has a couple of versions of it. But at the end of the day, I think now we see kind of the framework, or the foundation, if you will, for how everything will start to fit into some of the traditional aviation rule sets and some of the new rule sets that really have been needed for UAS and for AAM, if you will, to really take flight, for pun intended. But at the end of the day, I think that this is an exciting space, and we see a lot of the light at the end of the tunnel coming for what has been needed for a while. Anything else, Josh, to add?
No.
So one of the latest regulatory topics that I think has been watched by quite a bit internationally is the Countering CCP Drone Act. So we have had this pass through the House, and Senate is still reviewing at the US level for what will be potentially a ban on some of the Chinese parts being used in manufacturing. So we're continuing to follow this. This is definitely something that would be disruptive to the industry. There's been some really good press that's been put out, especially by Drone Life. We mentioned a couple of things here, but then outside of it, like, what's going to happen? So we can continue to have maybe questions and stuff at the end if there's some more here, but we just want to make sure that people are tracking this and aware of this. A lot of the political things that have happened in the US lately have probably put this on hold for a little bit, but right now with NDAA compliance, or NDAA compliance, we do have some states that have adopted this, and whether the US will at large or not is still under question. But as far as solutions, if people are out there looking for it, most people are looking towards the blue list. There's also a green list. It's not 100% the same thing, but obviously you could look at, if you need to have NDAA compliant aircraft, that will right now is being carried under the blue list certification. And then for anything where you have to comply with cybersecurity threats or anything else like that, the green list does exist for that as well. So great references here. If anyone needs to look into that more or has questions, please let us know at the end. Josh, anything to add on this exciting topic?
No, I would say the biggest challenge around this, it's having a pretty big impact in education. So you look at kind of how do you buy aircraft that are cost effective in the educational space. There's a lot coming from this. To Alice's point, it's making its impact. There's still a lot coming down, I think, the pipeline on this and kind of how it rolls out. But going back to the workforce need and how do you train an individual on this technology, and then the cost of the technology to begin with, there's a lot of ROI discussions going on around this conversation as well.
Josh, I know we've had a couple of conversations lately on some of the hydrogen stuff, but I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about some of the latest tech advancements that you've seen, or that USI has been thinking through aviation, even auto market. But defense space seems to have quite a bit of continued growth. And I know that you mentioned earlier in the call a little bit over 16 billion in industry growth or industry size for the UAS. And I think about 14 billion of that, at least as of last year, was what we researched and found for the defense sales space. So it's a huge part of our sector. But as far as the tech that's out there for commercial industry or anything else, What are you seeing out there?
So I think, again, going back to, a comment I made earlier about like career tech ed, like, again, you look at all the industry clusters in this industry, you see industries that previously didn't have aviation embedded at an operational level. So think like agriculture. Agriculture, you may have a corporate entity that has a flight department for transporting, folks around the world, but aviation deployment inside of operational segments of these industries is new. And so what's exciting is you watch like agronomists within agriculture, where agronomists have gone out in the field for years and told, a farmer, hey, your field has XYZ issues. The ability to leverage drone technology now and provide a more holistic view for precision ag has been a game changer. And it's a game changer that continues to evolve with your Part 137 ag drones that are precision agriculture. When you combine those two together, you now have precision agriculture from a mapping, a multi-spec perspective, multispectral being part of that electromagnetic spectrum, and your ag spraying drone that now can spray specific areas that have health issues versus spraying the entire field. That's a massive technological enhancement, and that's going to be a major kind of green initiative moving into the future. So that's ag. Set that industry cluster aside, then you talk about construction and the use of drones in construction for all sorts of use cases, everything from moving supplies around a community that's being built to doing inspection work or progress work around construction sites to surveying the site at the very beginning of the project and getting an orthomosaic map of a location. The cost efficiencies behind drone technology and the advancements in this technology just in the last 10 years has been phenomenal. I mean, you kind of look at this technology boom, and I talk about the drone industry, and I'm always comparing it to the aviation industry because it's like historical pages of aviation kind of just being ripped right out of the book. Like it's the industry repeating itself, but aviation's been around for 120 years. You watch the drone industry and some of these tech advancements, it's the rapid innovation process is happening quickly. And so you use LiDAR. The advancements in LiDAR, light detection and ranging has been incredible. And the ability of using LiDAR to create 3D models of a location is really, really neat. And if you wrap that with imagery, you create digital twins. And so digital twinning assets has become a major initiative of a lot of corporations out there that have infrastructure everywhere, but they don't have great maintenance records, or maybe they don't have, pull numbers like in the electric utility space, kind of jumping sectors for a second. The electric utility or infrastructure space, the ability of leveraging drone technology with high resolution imagery. So you look at phase one cameras. Phase one cameras have 100 megapixel images, but the ability to attach that to a drone now allows you as an operator that may not have helicopter pilots to deploy high resolution imagery for localized inspections and looking at a tag on a tower or a number or a serial number. You can do that without ever climbing that pole or that tower. That is a major safety reduction. And so what this means is that by leveraging technology, and there are a lot of different payload sensors out there in the marketplace, we're improving how we do work within the corporation. The reasons you use drone technology in the first place are to save money, reduce hazard hours, or to make money. Those are really the three main areas. You've probably heard in the Department of Defense space, you got dull, dirty, dangerous, right? Those are the reasons you use drones. In the commercial space, it's save money, make money, reduce hazard hours. So looking at the tech advancements, not just on the payload side, but the most important thing for this call is the reason these aircraft are flying is the payload. It's the data that these companies are able to obtain from the aircraft platform. And so when you look at some of the tech advancements that are happening on the data link side, so how we communicate with the aircraft, this is improving how we maintain reliability in our connection to the aircraft. One of the big concerns about remotely piloted technology is lost communications. So you're operating that technology downrange, and this has happened to me more than I'd like to admit, but you're operating an aircraft downrange and suddenly you get all these warning signals like lost communications. You have no comms with your aircraft downrange. that is a very uncomfortable position to be in as a pilot in command of the aircraft, where you no longer have command and control. So the enhancements in command and control data links and the encryptions and the just the connectivity and the reliability. I mean, you look at SpaceX and the ability of using like satellite-based command and control, and then ground-based solutions for using cellular for command. There's all these solutions in the marketplace that keep coming to life, and in the last decade, they've come a long ways. All of these advancements are supporting not just drone technology today, but it becomes part of the emerging advanced air mobility, which we talk a lot about, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of investment inside of that industry, which is what this slide or this image on the right side of the screen is showing. It's basically saying, look, automotive companies have poured a lot of money into regional air mobility with advanced air mobility assets. And right now you have a lot of them going after single piloted operations type certification, but you have some like Boeing's Whisk that is going after fully remotely operated type certification. So you have very different models of getting into the marketplace, but at the end of the day, when you look at the business models, these need to be remotely piloted technologies as we go into the future. And so all of these technological advancements are part of how we're creating the safety cases for the technology. It's how you create redundancy in your command and control link. So you may have an antenna that is your primary link, so you're communicating directly with the aircraft via antenna, but you may have a backup that is cellular service, or maybe it's a backup that's satellite based. But what it means is that the goal is to not go lost communication with your aircraft. And there's been amazing technological enhancements on the data link side. So we talked about the payload, the data link. We're getting much more refined on the technologies on these aircraft, because again, a reminder, they're not type certificated components. So we're working with aircraft today. Again, the bigger companies like your Advanced Air Mobility, they're working through type certificated aircraft with TCPs. But in the drone world, a lot of these components are commercial off the shelf. Some of them are coming from entities that are developing them that are not type certificated components. So we don't necessarily have a lot of data behind the reliability and the uptime of these components. That's probably the next big phase of this industry, is really refining and providing data-backed information tied to components that go on board these aircraft. But again, long-winded way to say there's a lot of technological advancements across all segments of these aircraft. They're highly technological, but from an aviation perspective, obviously those tech advancements, they have to be data-driven, right? We want components that are reliable. They've been tested and tried in cold weather, hot weather. Frequencies do weird things around water, and so it's also about like what kind of frequencies do you work with on these aircraft based on the operational environment you're working in and around. So it's an exciting space, but it's a highly technological face of aviation. And again, it's that emerging technology side of the industry that's a really exciting place to be. It's kind of like the jet engine for aviation.
Yeah, there's a lot of great content in there. And on the data component, I want to make one quick comment in the medical sector, because I do think it's something near and dear to my heart. But in that space, what I think we've started to see, we still need a little bit more in the world of custody chain, but as far as to keep updates on the data, as far as like handoffs and as far as like temperature controls, pressure, anything that might be moved, making sure that everything is 100% in its highest of integrity form. And so what we have seen in the medical space, if you haven't seen Zipline's new Droid 2 and watched the video on how that's going to change kind of the game for what Zipline can do, because their aircraft has done a lot internationally, and they came into the US a couple years ago. But as far as a fixed wing aircraft for some of the healthcare partnerships in the US, they needed a little bit of a different fit. And so they came out with their Droid 2 aircraft, or their Droid 2 that will winch down from their what is a modified version of their aircraft platform. And that will have more precision landing, ability to deliver specific locations to and from within some of the US requirements. But great video that they have out there on that new tech. But what we've also seen is some of the fixed wing components that will serve rural healthcare. We've seen some other international companies that have come into the US, like Swoop Aero and aerial loop. They're doing some really interesting things with their either a hybrid aircraft platform or their fixed wing platform, but we're starting to finally get to some longer range operations. And so I know that the first really long BV loss waiver was approved last year, at the end of last year in 2023. It was for 134 miles. And that's because the Swoop Aerotech has some really long range flight capabilities. So really interesting use case there for rural healthcare delivery. That's down in Texas, very rural area. There's, they're flying over almost no population, but as far as the communities that's being served, people that have to drive 2-3 hours and can't afford to take the time off of work, honestly, to do that for basic medical needs, these types of aircraft are serving those individuals in 3 different communities down in Southwest Texas. So a lot of things there. And then with Aerial Loop, I know that they've started to integrate some medical opportunities as well for longer range flight. And I think that's something that's been needed in the medical space, to have things actually move to areas that are needed, whether they're rural or whether they're urban. Josh, I'm going to hand it back over to you to talk a little bit more about sector use.
Yeah, so for these slides, we're not going to spend a ton of time on them. They're here for really you to take a look at, the audience, to just kind of look at some ways, links tied to different industry sectors of what's being done. Public safety, we mentioned. Public safety is a major user of emerging technology. There's so many use cases that puts public safety members out of harm's way. So great use of the technology. Telecom, being able to leverage drone technology for inspection work, for emergency, after storm response type of work, unbelievable opportunities there, or after storm connectivity. Really interesting articles tied there. And then marketing and sales. Real estate is one of probably the largest users of drone technology. It's a new way to sell real estate, being able to take aerial footage, never before really recognized shots in that field. It's creating amazing opportunities for the marketing space, not just real estate, but you look at business marketing. Every movie you watch now has some sort of drone footage from a cinematography perspective. So take a look at these links, the slides made available to you through PDF. Next slide has a couple of other use cases. Construction, we talked about. Agriculture, we talked about. And then electric utility. I would actually venture to say electric utility is probably the #1 utilizer of drone technology today in the US. So there could be data that proves me wrong, but you'll find that electric utilities are scaling emerging tech across the organization. And some of this is for inspection work. So being able to inspect insulators, the lines, the poles, all the parts and components that connect them, for uptime, making sure that the electric utility frameworks in different states are ready for storms. It also prevents, the wildfire issues that have occurred. It's about keeping everything maintained to an up status, that allows and ensures that electrical lines aren't falling, and hitting the ground. So electric utility inspections, and then the ability to pull lines across valleys. The use cases for drone technology and electric utility is vast, whether you're in distribution, transmission, or even generation. Inspections and digital twinning and georectification of all the poles in an infrastructure. It's amazing what this technology is allowing electric utility to do to really improve the tracking and the monitoring of our electrical infrastructure.
Thanks, Josh. Hey, Catherine, I'm going to ask you a quick question because I wanted to let the audience know how they can access these slides. I think they're available in the chat, yes. Or will they be sent out afterwards?
They're actually in the handout section. For all of you attending, there is a in the control panel, there's a drop down that says handouts with the #1, and there's a PDF of the presentation there that they can download.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get into a little bit more operationally speaking, and I think that this is a little bit more about how USI kind of takes an approach with the market and some of the risk-based analysis that we have. So we do have Josh that's actually really great at talking to this slide, but as far as like 3 parts to every ConOps, I remember when I just joined the organization only 6 weeks ago, so I'm fairly new, but I've done a lot in the industry for the past 7 or 8 years, and a lot of it's included writing ConOps work. And a really simple way to think about, making sure you have a really solid ConOps is to kind of break it down into 3 different categories. And those categories are really your workforce or your human factors, your organization or the documentation and everything that you have in place to provide your pilot team or your personnel team with information and with proper instruction, and then also the technology that you're using in order to make the operation safe. So Josh, I'm going to bring you back in to talk about this, but outside of breaking that down, I think that's a really good way to look at it. And we have a couple cool graphics here for you guys to look at, and how USI really thinks about kind of the circulatory, or you know, how everything kind of works together as far as an ecosystem, or a safety ecosystem, if you will, to manage risk.
So thanks, Alice. What's interesting about an organization, again, we look at drone technology and we say, look, the reality is it's an aviation asset that you're deploying in the national airspace. Your risk profile is really going to drive what level of documentation do you need, you know, what level of personnel training do you need, and that's based on, you know, aircraft size. Are you flying over people, property, around other aircraft? What kind of airspace? There's so many pieces that go into that, and we'll talk about the risk structure. But when you look at the pillars, we've always looked at these three pillars as core to kind of how USI looks at the business, because again, we're an aviation company, and so we're looking at this from an aviation risk perspective. And organizationally, even if you're operating small UAS visual line of sight, you know, if you're operating with 10 pilots, those 10 pilots, they could have come from any walk of life. And what we find is that it is very difficult inside of the emerging tech world to create a safety culture. And that's because the safety culture, you know, it's dependent, it's a living, breathing thing. But if you're not putting an emphasis on best practices, on processes, on safety, it's hard to build a safety culture, because if the drone technology inherently it's automated, it's very stable, it has an autopilot on board. At the end of the day, training and workforce development is there because of the abnormal emergency situation. No different than aviation. You go to, you know, flight training, recurrency training every year, because it's part of how you train to make sure you're ready for that emergency and abnormal situation that could occur. Same thing goes for the emerging technology world. When you create a CONOPS, right, a concept of operations, today you do this for waiverable operations from Part 107. Again, that 107, going back to kind of, that was the bubble around the industry. You can do things waivered from Part 107 regs, but it requires a safety case. And so when you look at it from a what is my operation, it starts with, well, what am I doing with the technology? What is my use case or my business case on behalf of the organization? And so once you've identified that, then you say, okay, well, what aircraft am I going to use for this particular operation? So then we get into the technology stack, and the technology stack is saying, look, we're going to use this aircraft for this particular operation, but now we need to discuss what are the redundancies, what are the safety features. A big topic in the industry today is detect and avoid. This is something I missed in the technology advancement section, but detect and avoid, onboard detect and avoid is basically technology on board the aircraft that helps you look for what we call uncooperative aircraft. In the UAS world, you have to maintain yield right away of every other aircraft or balloon or parachuter in the airspace. And so because of that, detect and avoid basically identifies a threat or an object that's in the flight path, and then the aircraft, the drone, will deconflict from that object. Could be a bird, you know, could be another aircraft. And so detect and avoid is an onboard detection system where there are no eyes, there are no pilots on board, so there's no visual on board the aircraft. Detect and avoid is that replacement. And so today you've probably heard the term of visual observer. We have visual observers in a lot of the loops on some of these operations because they provide the ground-based visualization of the airspace in order to provide that feedback back to the pilot in command, or remote pilot in command. So when you look at these pillars, they all have all sorts of nuances. And in the personnel section, you'll see in this image, you have what we call stage 1, 2, and 3. Today we're calling it primary, advanced, and complex. When you look at these, your documentation is very different as you go from a primary program to an advanced program. And advanced means, look, you're flying a Group 2 aircraft up to 55 pounds, but maybe you're flying an aircraft in a beyond visual line of sight capacity. Well, with that, you have to have special emergency and abnormal procedures, which as you get bigger aircraft, you get more redundant equipment, meaning you need to understand what happens if a specific component fails. What's the backup and what does that mean? Different frequencies have different latencies. So you need to understand, like, some frequencies you may have a 2 to 3 second delay on the commands you're sending to the aircraft in the response you're getting. And so all of this goes into the ConOps, but we've built it into 3 pillars just because it makes it simple to talk through how a ConOps needs to be created and the thought processes that go into mitigating risk as part of that operation.
Excellent. Let's get into the risk part a little bit more.
So on the risk profile, we talked about kind of risk profiles being different, right? And so we have not mentioned SORA yet, but SORA is the JARS SORA. If you're from overseas, you've probably heard of JARS SORA, Specific Operational Risk Assessment. We really lean on this model. We really like that model for identifying air and ground-based risks. This is an example of a risk chart, a radar matrix, where we say, look, when you're looking at your operation for the first time, and again, this is different from aviation because it's expeditionary now. We're not necessarily on an airport taking off, and our aircraft's not necessarily type certificated. And so in those worlds, we're looking at air risk. We're saying, what kind of class of airspace are we operating in? What's the kinetic energy of my aircraft? Meaning, how big is my aircraft and how frangible is my aircraft? Like, is it built to disintegrate on impact, or is it built out of heavy materials that's going to make a large impact? And so it's all about the emergency situation analysis. If you look at the range of the aircraft, it's very different if you're operating visual on a site where I'm looking at it the whole time, or if I'm going to fly 5 miles downrange versus 50 miles downrange, which present very unique circumstances, considering that we don't have that micro of a weather instrumentation set up, in most countries yet. And so there's still some technological advancements that need to happen, but it's a risk profile that you analyze. And then system, looking at this, what kind of redundancies does it have? Are there single points of failure? Some aircraft in the marketplace, if you lose GPS coverage, which happens all the time in the field, if you lose GPS coverage and the aircraft only has one GPS, the aircraft no longer knows where it is. And so you're going to start seeing it fly somewhere where it thinks it knows where it's going, but the GPS is completely inaccurate. And so you have to look at all these different areas, and then what it creates is this risk matrix. It says, look, your risks are fairly low. Your operation is a primary operation, low risk, low complexity. You have basic principles that your training and your documentation mirrors all of that. As you expand out into the higher risk categories, it increases your entire operational footprint and the required documentation and the personnel training workforce requirements and technology requirements you need to make sure that that aircraft operation is safe and that you're maintaining right of way to all other aircraft.
Great job. Hopefully there will be some good questions on that.
So as we work our way into workforce programs, and we'll kind of start with the first pillar being workforce. Workforce programs in our world is really important because there are not airman certification standards in the remotely piloted space. You have Part 107, but a lot of individuals, and again, I think this is from aviation, they kind of look at drone technology as, hey, it's drone technology, like that, it's a segment. But it's akin to saying, hey, that's the ultralight, segment of aviation, or that's the rotorcraft industry. Like, drones present all sorts of new applications of aviation. And so when you look at the emerging tech world, it's a lot like looking at the aviation world and saying, look, we have Part 121 airlines, we have corporate aircraft under 135, we have Part 91 internal operations, we have ultralights, we have Part 137 ag operations, we have all sort of balloon operations. We have all sorts of operations in the aviation world, and they're different. The aircraft, they're designed different. They're for different applications. We have the same exact setup happening in the emerging tech world. Problem is right now we only have 107, which is the regulatory environment, at least in the States. Again, that's mirrored a lot across the rest of the world, but for the most part, we're all operating under small technology. So when we look at this industry, there's a lot that needs to be addressed. And so in the workforce framework, there's the FAA requirements. Again, that's for the US, kind of focused on Part 107. We leverage NIST standards, which are part of, it's really highly leveraged in the public safety community, but it's a skill-based assessment to understand, hey, do you have the psychomotor skills? Can you use the camera on the aircraft? We deploy that through flight training programs. There's ASTM standards for personnel training standards. So what does somebody need to know and be able to perform to fly within the national airspace? And then we have a partnership. So we actually leverage loss control data. You know, what kind of information should be part of the education training program to reduce the risk profiles by the pilot? Why are we seeing losses from a pilot skill set perspective? And so we tie that back into the course framework. So all of this informs the workforce side of the standards.
Great, thanks, Josh. That's exciting. We have about 10 minutes left, and I know we want to get through just a little bit more, a few more slides. But we've talked a little bit about workforce, some of the personnel requirements, and then technology and things like that. But Josh, as far as anything on this slide that you want to highlight, you know, with back to legacy aviation. Yeah.
You know, the biggest part of this slide, just to take away, is that this community, emerging technology, drone technology, AAM, it's made up of really 4 major cultures: aviation, DoD, hobby recreational, and the tech community. And when you look at all of these separately, you know, they all need each other in some ways. You know, the aviation sometimes needs some of the innovation, and then the technology world really needs aviation process and procedure. And so it's a tug of war in some ways when you look at this industry. Our goal from an aviation safety perspective is create a shared mental model around what does safety in this industry look like. You know, you have to be innovative to drive the industry forward, but at the same time, you have to have a process and a procedure. So all this slide is meant to do is say, look, every organization that's bringing a remotely piloted, you know, workforce in, you're probably bringing them from very different walks of life. In this culture, you want to mold it into one safety culture within an organization, because all 4 of these communities are looking at drone technology in a very different way.
Great.
And then again, workforce perspective, we talked about primary and advanced, stage 1, stage 2. This is how we structure workforce programs, even organizational operations. Primary being low risk, low complexity, advanced being beyond visual line of sight, group 2 aircraft, group 3 aircraft, basically highly automated operations that require a higher level of human factors education and understanding, fatigue management. This is very much operating from a computer, whereas primary operations are a lot more psychomotor skills. Advanced operations are about managing automation. It could be multiple aircraft, but you're managing automation, you're monitoring airspace, and you're ensuring the safety of flight through computer ground control station.
To expand upon what Josh was just talking about as far as the primary or advanced certifications that USI offers, he talked a little bit about in the beginning, you know, 107, Part 107 license is all that's really required in the industry, but when you really want to prepare your organization or yourself for operating in a professional manner, or really just upskilling as much as you can in order to be out there, you know, having flight time on the aircraft is important, and then outside of it, just the ability to have safety plans in place and then risk management plans in place. So we have 2 different tracks at USI. If anyone's interested in this afterwards, please reach out. We'll have our contact information on here. But the primary certification does take you through the psychomotor skills, like Josh was just talking to. As far as a knowledge-based certification course, that's really what the majority of it is. But there is a flight and an in-person flight component to this. And that's really where I think we kind of set ourselves above a lot of the industry, is making sure that there's actual, you know, 3 to 4 days of flight time that people get going through our primary certifications. And in the advanced certifications, you get really more into a longer amount of flight time, but then also specifically risk management and preparing more for, you know, emergency situations and things of that nature. Josh, anything else to add to this slide?
No.
And then our courses you can find online, but we can also, or in this brief, but for anybody that is interested in anything as far as being an instructor through USI's programs, or just as far as our training goes for pilot certification, we do cover quite a bit of safety levels, and those are important because when we get into a little bit more of our partnership with IBAC, where IBAC really, I think, excels is at the aviation level as well. Having aviation grade experience across the industry and across the globe, really, and then outside of it, when you're trying to take either your drone department, whether you're one individual or you're 15 or you're a large organization, you know, operating at an aviation level under an aviation department is going to have some requirements that you're going to have to meet, especially if you're working through IBAC or meeting IS-BAO operator requirements. So there's a couple stages that they have that we can help you get to at your drone department. And I'll let Josh talk to that a little bit before we close out.
Yeah, I think the key here is, we talk about the standards to the workforce side, then there's standards to the organizational side. As a flight department that has, again, an IS-BAO standard, right, stage 1, 2, 3, the RPAS standard is about what does your organization need to look like to operate remotely piloted technology as an aviation flight department. So it's that organizational structure. If you think about it on the workforce side, you have the standard, you have the body of knowledge, and then you have the validator, which is the certification, the industry certification to the standard. Same exact thing in the organizational world. You have the standard, the RPAS standard. You have your body of documentation, your processes, your procedures, your SMS plan, and then you have the validation, through that IS-BAO audit that comes on site. So today we send IS-BAO auditors that want to audit RPAS operations through a training program. Again, understanding from a workforce side how an RPAS operation is different than maybe a fixed wing or a rotorcraft operation, and prepares them with that knowledge, that mindset of how are these two industries different and how are they alike, and that's the goal of that program. So organizationally, this is the standard, which then leads into that organizational footprint or that safety ecosystem. On the next slide.
Great, thanks.
And so the organization is made up of documentation, SMS, and process. And so this is just a generic kind of program image to say, look, this is what an organization looks like. This is a safety ecosystem. Today, because Part 107 is the pilot, it revolves around that pilot in a lot of ways. This will evolve over time as we start having organizational standards. Potentially if that 108 that becomes that organizational requirement or projection. But every organization has pieces of this puzzle, and this makes up, how it aligns back to that standard. This safety ecosystem becomes that body, in the knowledge world, it's that body of knowledge tied to how you earn the competencies. This is how you build your organization to meet those standards tied back to that RPAS standard, which leads us into technology. And on the technology footprint, going back to the standards at the beginning, ASTM has a lot of standards tied to technology, everything from remote ID, but there are no type certificated components tied to, again, most commercial technology. There are more and more initiatives going on with type certificated emerging technology. But when you look at it, and this is a slide I've been using for almost 9 years, but we have a lot. You can have a perfectly built aircraft, perfect, triple redundancies on everything, and it can be the safest aircraft as an aircraft, but we all know from aviation is you operate in an imperfect environment, meaning we can't control the weather. GPS is managed by the DoD, at least in the US. There's things you can't control. They're out of your control because they're external to the aircraft, and that presents technology issues. This could be traffic management. This could be aircraft specific, weather-based, but when we look at this, being able to standardize the technology today, if I jump in an aircraft, pretty much any aircraft, I pretty much know what I'm looking at, right? You have a standard operational, instrumentation package, but drone technology is not built that way yet. There's a lot of differences as you go aircraft to aircraft, and we really think that's the technology standardization and safety cases is going to be an important part over the next decade.
Great. I think we're kind of right at time. We probably didn't leave too much time for questions, but Josh got to say his thank yous in the beginning, but to the IBAC team, to Catherine and Andrew who helped us and set this up, thank you so much. And then to everybody that sat here and listened to us for the last hour, we really appreciate all of your time. Our contact information is on the screen. You're welcome to reach out to us for any questions. And then